and welcome to the Dill Pickle Movie Network. I am Dylan Randazzo, and welcome to my last video of ranking all the Disney animated films by their eras. We started with the Golden Age, went through the wartime era, the Silver Age, the Dark Age, went into the Renaissance, post-Renaissance, and now we're here at the Revival era, aka the resurgence of Disney animation after a bit of a lull in the 2000s. I do like the post-Renaissance, but it wasn't the most successful financially. They were still figuring out all the experimentation with CG animation. This was really a return to form. Disney actually went and purchased Pixar at the end of the 2000s, and because of that, John Lasseter ended up being the one who was overseeing both Pixar and Walt Disney Animation as their chief creative officer. With John Lasseter in the creative chair, we saw a lot of more parallels to Disney and Pixar, and you saw a little bit of blending to where Disney actually in the tail end of the 2010s ended up being the one that won all the awards, not necessarily Pixar. You had movies like Frozen, Big Hero 6, Zootopia, Encanto all win a Best Animated Feature Oscar. So it was kind of like a shift from the Pixar-dominated animation landscape to the more Disney-dominated animation landscape. And it's very interesting to see that change, especially because this is also the era where we see the 2D animation completely thrown aside for the CG animation. And there's a bittersweetness to that, a sweetness in the fact that this was a super financially successful era for Disney. It still is. I mean, the Revival era is still going on. A lot of people say that the Revival era ended when John Lasseter left around the release of Ralph Breaks the Internet, but for the sake of this video and the fact that only a few movies have come out since John Lasseter left Disney, I figured I would just rope them all up into one video, call it the Revival era, since we're still in that successful financial high. We're still seeing it with movies like I just mentioned with Encanto. I mean, Encanto wins Best Animated Feature. It's very financially successful. Yes, we had the COVID era right in the middle of that, but even then, I mean, I think Disney is thriving more than they ever have in terms of finances and awards and all that jazz. So it's going to be really interesting to talk about these movies because these are considered some of the best of Disney's animated canon, and I do agree to an extent. I think some of these movies are really great, but I think some of them are also a little overrated. I think that's also a conversation to have when you have movies that are such financial hits. Are they really that great of films, or do they just have a lot of things that a lot of kids and a lot of audiences are drawn to? Maybe their music, maybe their merchandising. We will find out as I rank these 12 films. If you want to check out any of the other rankings, check out the playlist above for all the past rankings in this series. And stay tuned for next week where I will be going through all the Disney live action remakes. I decided because there are so many of them, I don't want to rank all of them. Instead, I'm going to be doing a tier list for them. So that'll be pretty fun. But this is the last ranking for these Disney-specific eras. So let's talk about the Revival era. Starting at number 12, we have Raya and the Last Dragon. Raya and the Last Dragon is probably one that a lot of people missed because of when it was released. You have the handicap of coming out in early 2021 when things were still shut down. People were still hesitant to go to the theaters. Streaming was really kicking it up another notch. So people had less and less of an excuse to go to the theaters to see this film, and I think that's a disservice only because I think the best thing about this film is the cinematic nature of it, is the animation. It is gorgeous. I think that's one thing with this era in general is there's no bad animation to be found. So I don't think the fact that something's well animated is going to actually help any of these films on this ranking because I think all these films across the board are successfully animated. This is not just the peak of box office, but the peak of budget. I mean, these movies were getting so much funding put into them. Even Raya and the Last Dragon, that did come out in a time where people weren't necessarily going to the theaters a lot, I do still think it had a lot of money poured into it, and I do think it shows. I think the animation, like I said, is stunning. The story itself, though, is where I'm not as engaged. I think there are likable characters to be found, especially Raya herself. I think Kelly Marie Tran, who is an MVP for me for The Last Jedi. I know that's a controversial topic, and I didn't want to say it on the internet, but I love Kelly Marie Tran, and I really do think she deserves more of a spotlight as an actress, and this film allows her to do so. The issue I have, though, like I said, is the story, and the fact that it's a lot of backstory, a lot of setup. This is a very complex world that is being built, but when you're building a story from scratch, and you have so many different layers to the mythology, you really need to take the time and explain it, and in a Disney movie, you only really have an hour and a half, so a lot of the backstory, a lot of the exposition is woven throughout the entire film to where a lot of the film is just bogged down in exposition to where we really don't get enough time to just live with the characters and just feel things with them and experience things with them and have revelations with them. Instead, we're kind of just spoon-fed a bunch of information as the film goes along, and I think that is a disservice for the film. I think another fault with this film is the fact that it's also a little bit predictable. The way we start the film, it becomes very obvious where the film is going to end up, and that's sometimes okay, especially because a lot of these stories are based on fairy tales. It's okay to have an inkling of knowing where this is going to end up, but I think they could have gone in a much more creative route in coming to some of those realizations and revelations. I just feel like from the very beginning, we know exactly how the events of this film are going to take place and are going to play out, and so many of the events that are played out are bogged down by exposition or, in some cases, unnecessary humor. I think the first act is really, really nice of establishing a darker tone, kind of giving it a little bit of a more melancholic feel, but then as the film goes on with the introduction of the dragon character voiced by Awkwafina, who is great in the role, but I do think she's almost a little too funny to where it feels a little tonally inconsistent.
Gonna be real with you, I'm not like the best dragon.
So for that reason, I do have it all the way at the bottom, even though I think it is still a good movie. I think it has some good aspects. Like I said, the animation, I do think the voice acting is a highlight, but I also think with the absence of music as well, there's just a little bit of a liveliness lost that a few of these other movies have. Even movies I have lower on the list, I think because of their music, also gives them a little bit of energy, a little bit more personality than this film has. So for that reason, Raya and the Last Dragon, it's very recent. It might go up later as I rewatch it more and more, but for right now, it's right here at number 12.
Have you ever done like a group project, but there's like that one kid who didn't pitch in as much, but still ended up with the same grade?
At number 11, we have Frozen 2. Now, Frozen I haven't talked about because it is higher on the list, spoiler alert, but I do think Frozen is the superior movie. I don't think the sequel is better. I think the sequel is probably better animated. Obviously, with time, the animation just gets better and better and better, but I think as good as the realistic water and the beautiful ice scenes can be, I think there has to be a strong foundation to support the beautiful visuals, and I don't think Frozen 2 necessarily has that. I think Frozen 2 falls into the trap that a lot of sequels do, in the fact that there are a lot of characters from the first film that were really important that they don't really know what to do with in the sequel. Elsa and Anna are once again the focus of this film, but it feels like the side characters, they really don't know what to do with them. Olaf especially is just here solely to crack jokes that I think are far subpar from the first film, and it just feels so out of place, especially because this story feels just overall more serious. I think the music itself is a little bit more epic and less fun, fanciful Disney. We're having fun, we're a fairy tale type movie, and so I think for that reason the comedy from Olaf just really doesn't hit. It doesn't make me laugh when I watch it. I like Josh Gad, but here it's a little too much. It's almost like they overindulged in something that they knew was good the first time, but didn't realize was only good because of the amount of time he was used, and I think they just went full-blown Olaf in this one, and it just doesn't work because, again, he doesn't really play that important of a part in the overall scheme of things. His whole arc is just, oh, well, all this will make sense when I'm older, and it's like, okay, I guess that's an arc, I guess. And then Kristoff, while he does have a fantastic song, and I do think the song that he sings is probably the best moment maybe of this whole era. I love Lost in the Woods. I think it's just a hilarious throwback to 90s boy band music videos.
I'm left behind, wondering if I should follow.
I think it's so cheesy, so meta, so campy, and I think that's exactly what Disney's humor should be tailored to, or moments like that, just really creative moments like that.
Wondering if you still care.
But again, I don't think his actual story is anything special. I think the whole purpose of his role is to, get the courage to ask Anna to marry him, but he already has the courage to ask her to marry him early on. It's Anna who's kind of refusing it and kind of changing the subject. Like, he is still the same character at the beginning of the film as he is at the end. He has the same objective. He wants to marry her at the beginning, he wants to marry her at the end. I don't think he changes a lot. So again, it's like all these extra side plots for characters that they wanted to still use because they have great voice actors, Jonathan Groff, Josh Gad, but they didn't really know what to do with the characters to make them fit the overall Anna and Elsa story. And then with the Anna and Elsa story, I think there are a lot of interesting ideas at play here, a lot of stuff about colonialism and feuding and rivaling families and responsibility that people in power have for other communities that look up to them to help them. I think that is really, really profound and really interesting, but they don't really go anywhere particularly interesting with them. Again, it comes to kind of a predictable resolution, and I do think the actual themes it's tackling are more exciting than the execution of how it's tackling them. So for that reason, I do have Frozen 2 lower on this list, even though I do think because of the music, it's at least a little bit more enjoyable for me on rewatch than Raya and the Last Dragon, which I think, because there's no music, kind of feels a little emptier.
Until then, I'm lost in the
At number 10, we have Moana. This might be a little controversial, I know. I want to start off by saying I love the music in this. I love the voice performances. I love the animation. The animation, I know I said that the animation doesn't really play into my rankings here, and it really doesn't because all these movies are stunningly animated, but Moana especially has some of the most gorgeous animation in any Disney film, period. It might have the most gorgeous animation, but I think because everything musically and visually is so stunning, I think sometimes people like to overrate this film because they don't really talk much about the story. And the story is fine, but again, it's a little simple. It's a little plain and basic. And I hate to say that because I love the character of Moana. I think she's a really strong protagonist, and I love the idea that she doesn't need a prince, that they don't even mention a prince. It's nothing about the story is about love or finding love like the traditional princess movie. It's all about self-growth and self-realization, and that's why I think the first 30 minutes of this movie is really, really good. But once she gets on the boat with Maui, it just kind of takes that conventional route of these two people, oh, we need to get to this place, to get to this place, to get this thing, to get this thing. And I think it also doesn't help that I don't really like the character of Maui. I like The Rock, but for some reason Maui has just never really interested me. I always kind of find him a little bit annoying.
It's actually Maui, shapeshifter, demigod of the wind and sea, hero of men. I interrupted from the top, hero of men. Go.
So once this becomes less of Moana's movie and more of Moana and Maui's movie, I just lose a little bit of interest. And I know that's a hot take because I know so many people love Moana. It's one of the most repeated and replayed movies on Disney Plus, and I think that's for a reason. Because again, like I said, the music is really good. I think How Far I'll Go is one of the greatest I Want songs of any movie. Not just Disney, but any movie, any musical. And I think that's where this film is at its strongest, when it's focused on Moana and her journey and her story. When it becomes too much about Maui, who is a character I just don't love, I'm just not as on board with it. I think it meanders a lot in the second act. I think it takes a long while to get from point A to point C. I think the point B in the middle is just a little too overlong, a little boring for me, even though it is, as I said, visually stunning. And Hey Hey, I think Hey Hey is a fun sidekick animal character, but I think Pua is the much more cute, much more amazing, much more endearing sidekick, yet they decide to leave Pua on the shore and they take the chicken with them on the sea. And I know a lot of people love Hey Hey. Fine, you can love Hey Hey. I love Alan Tudyk too, but I just like Pua better. So the fact that they went with the other animal sidekick as like the main sidekick of the film, it's another choice that I don't necessarily love. Again, this is nitpicking because all these movies are good. Like, there's a reason why these are some of Disney's most popular. I've just got to weigh all the pros and cons, and for me, Moana has a few more cons than a lot of people like to admit.
They're kinda cute.
Moving on to number 9, we have Frozen. I just talked about Frozen 2, but Frozen is its own beast. The qualms I have with Frozen have nothing to do with Frozen 2. In fact, I think the themes here and the actual execution of the whole sisterly bond and sisterly love, and the fact that these princes are not the real sources of their love, it's really the bond that they have with one another, love thawing the frozen heart. I think that stuff is really good. I think the comedy from Olaf here is also really successful at times.
I'm Olaf. Hi.
You're creepy.
And I think the songs here are amazing. The songs are incredible. I mean, there's a reason why Let It Go became such a smash hit. And I think that is the reason why this film in general became such a smash hit, is because of that one song. But I think the other songs are great as well. Love is an Open Door, First Time in Forever, In Summer is a great little sidekick song. So why do I have this film lower on the list, you may ask? I think it's because of the use of the songs. I think the songs themselves are good, but when constructing a musical, all the songs, except for one, are shoved into the first 40 minutes of the movie. I mean, Let It Go happens, I think, a half hour in, and then you have In Summer about 40 minutes in, and then there's a long lull. Then there's a little bit of a reprise between Anna and Elsa, which takes 30 seconds, and then at the end of the movie, there's this fixer-upper troll song, and I think that's actually the weakest song, so the fact that all the songs are shoved toward the front of the film, and then there's one big musical number at the end, and it's not a good one, I think that's just a fault of the actual story structure and the structure as a musical. I think when constructing a musical, you need to have songs filled throughout, stuff that keeps us engaged the whole time, and it feels like they put so much thought into that first half that they kind of neglected the second half, and I think that's also where the story gets a little bit less interesting as well. I think that's where it becomes a little bit more conventional, a little less of that spark is felt toward the end. I was on the Frozen train when I first saw it. I loved Frozen in theaters because I was swept up in what everyone else was swept up in. The amazing songs early on. I mean, they get you right off the bat with some amazing songs, and I think that's a strength of Frozen, but the fact of the matter is, after all those songs are done, you still have a whole hour left of film with one little troll song in it, and it just doesn't feel as even. It just kind of feels like an uneven viewing experience because of that.
This is awkward. Not you're awkward, but just because I'm awkward. You're gorgeous. Wait, what?
But like I said, I think the themes are strong. I think the sisterly bond is great. I think the humor is welcome here, even if it's not the strongest humor of this era. I think this era is very strong. So there are films higher than it only because I like them more. And I do think Frozen is a tad overrated because it is such a smash hit and because people just rave about it and exhausted it to the point, you know, where you couldn't go 10 minutes without hearing Let It Go. I think that plays into it as well. It's just a little bit of Frozen fatigue. And I think maybe 10, 20 years from now, when I watch Frozen, I'll kind of find that love again for it. But I think because it's just so overplayed still, you know, you go everywhere in Disney World. It's everywhere in Disney World. So I think that's one thing with Frozen as well, is the fatigue of just being such a smash hit. When there are other films that I think should be just as praised as Frozen, but because Frozen has all the great songs, I think that's why Frozen does land a little lower on this list when watching all these films in the moment for this video.
A real howler in July, yeah?
At number 8, we have The Princess and the Frog. This is actually one of the only first-time watches for me for this video. I had actually never seen Princess and the Frog until this video. With a rewatch or two, this could definitely go higher on the list because I do have a lot of fondness for a lot of aspects of it. I think there's a bittersweetness that comes with the animation, a bitterness obviously in the fact that we haven't gotten much 2D animation since, and it's an art form that I think is slowly dying out, and it's so sad to see as someone who's such a fan of 2D animation. But it's a sweet thing in the fact that one of the last Disney films to showcase 2D animation is this one, and it's a really good film.
That's new.
I think this is a great encapsulation of all you can do with 2D animation, with all the voodoo stuff, all the influence from New Orleans culture. I've never been to New Orleans, but it's a place I've always wanted to go. So I think just watching this film, I got such a great sense of what that culture and what that flavor and that atmosphere was all about. The food they eat, the music they play, the colors, the locations, it's all so beautiful to me. To where even the story, which is a little bit simple in nature, I mean, it's really not that complex or that profound, but I think it doesn't matter because everything around it is doing such a good job in building this sense of atmosphere, this sense of tone, this sense of style. And I think there is still a really nice story to be found. The idea of, you know, not judging books by covers and, you know, it doesn't matter what you look like. I mean, that's literally one of the songs. You know, I think that's a great message. You know, it's a simple message, but it's a good message. I love the idea that Disney was really willing to embrace a black princess. And I do applaud Disney in general for this whole era for being diverse. I mean, I haven't talked about with Raya and the Last Dragon, Moana, this film, a lot of them really embrace the culture of the characters they are putting to screen. And I think that's really important for young kids to watch and see themselves in these movies and say, you know what, I can be like her, or I can have dreams, I can achieve things. And I think that's what's really special about this era. I do think with a few more rewatches, this could definitely go further up the list. It's just I don't have the same nostalgia for this as I do the other films. But I really do like this film. I really enjoyed it on a first watch.
I suppose you want a kiss.
Kissing would be nice, yes?
At number 7, we have Winnie the Pooh. Princess and the Frog, as I said, was a great showcase for 2D animation, and Winnie the Pooh is just as much a great send-off for 2D animation, but it is the send-off. It is the sad farewell to 2D animation, and I think because it's only an hour long, some people kind of brush it aside, but I think it's such a sweet story. Even in that small hour, they're able to tell such a fun story with such fun, colorful characters. I mean, I've talked all about these characters when I talked about the many adventures of Winnie the Pooh. This is my favorite crop of characters of any Disney project, of any Disney franchise. I really love the Winnie the Pooh characters, and I think they utilize them even better as an ensemble here.
A simple hello would do. Thank you very much.
I think the original stories from the many adventures of Winnie the Pooh is stronger than this story, but I think the use of characters here is even better because you're letting every character get their time to shine. I think Owl gets more of a time to shine in this film, as obnoxious as he can be. I think Eeyore really gets his time to shine, which if you know me, you know I love Eeyore. He's my favorite Disney character.
Have a contest to find a new tale for Eeyore.
So it's nice to see him get more of a spotlight in this film as well. And Zooey Deschanel, who is not a Winnie the Pooh character, but she's just a great actress and she sings all these songs really delightfully. I mean, her kind of soft, smooth tone really blends well with the soft, smooth tone of this film. It's a very laid-back kind of vibe that this film gives off because it is short. It is very quaint. It's very thoughtful. You know, it's very sweet. And Zooey Deschanel's vocals really bring a lot to that. I don't think this is one of the great masterpieces of the era, but I think because it is a great showcase of 2D animation and it's full of characters I love and it is that last 2D animated film, I feel like I needed to give it the representation it deserves and the respect it deserves and put it this high on the list.
You sneezed.
No, I didn't. The word is issue, not at you.
You must be catching a cold.
At number 6, we have Ralph Breaks the Internet. Now, I haven't talked about Wreck-It Ralph because, spoiler alert, it's a little higher on this list, but I really like Ralph Breaks the Internet. I think a lot of people have problems with it because it is a sequel and it's not as good as the original, but I don't think it necessarily has to be. I think when I talked about Frozen 2, I talked about a lot of the traps that sequels can find themselves in, and I think this film avoids those traps. This film understands that this is a Ralph and Vanellope story, and instead of trying to force different storylines on the side characters, they instead just decide to kind of sideline the side characters. And in this case, I think that's okay, because I'd rather have Fix-It Felix and Calhoun have one great scene in this film, rather than Olaf, who they didn't really know what to do with in Frozen 2, have like 20 scenes where he's spitting out dialogue that isn't funny or interesting. I think this is a much smarter sequel approach in that it's focusing solely on Ralph and Vanellope's relationship, while also not retreading the same things from the first. The first was all about finding that relationship and finding a friend and finding that acceptance, and here I think it's more about when you have that friend and when you have that acceptance, willing to let part of that go to also support their individual interests, and that just because you're friends with someone doesn't mean you need to be each other's life 100% of the time. And I think this can apply to friendships. I think this can apply to romantic relationships as well. The fact that you can't just be handcuffed to one another 24/7. You need to give each other time and space, and I think that's what this film does really well.
I don't think I could ever tell Ralph. There's no law saying best friends have to have the same dreams.
I actually saw this film for the first time after a relationship of mine ended, so I kind of got a little emotional the first time seeing this because this was addressing that idea of, you know, we can't always be together all the time. We need that time and space apart, and that will help us grow individually. And, you know, there was a little bit of a sorrow to that, but it was really cathartic to see that a kid's movie, an animated movie, was tackling those themes and doing it so profoundly, and I think that's what this film does super well. Now, obviously, I haven't talked about the whole internet thing, the fact that this goes into the internet and there's all these Disney Easter eggs, and I'll be honest, there's a little bit of corporate overindulgence in those Disney scenes, but I think they do them successfully to where they're funny, they're fun to watch. I think they use the cameos and they use all the different internet references smartly. I think the world they create around the internet is really fascinating to see, even though I think in 10, 20 years from now, this movie might feel a little bit dated, and I think that's why I put this a little lower on the list, is because I do think this film is of its time, and I don't necessarily think it's going to transcend time in the fact that it's covering all the internet stuff and just the state of where social media and Twitter are nowadays. Is this even the same film it was in 2018? No, it's not. But because of the friendship with Ralph and Vanellope and that idea of strengthening a friendship through growing apart and through space, I think that is so smart. And that's why I think I will come back to this film. As much as these references may end up being dated, I think that core story is what's going to make me come back to this film, and because I just enjoy these characters. I love these characters. Yes, they don't use Felix and Calhoun a lot in this film, but they don't need to, because they are not the central part of the story like they were in the first film, and I think they use them smartly to still give them some nice glimmers of stuff without overindulging, like I said, like they did with Olaf and with some of the characters in Frozen 2. So I think this is a much more successful sequel, even if it isn't as good as the original. Rarely will a sequel ever be as good as the original, but I think because Disney came off of so many straight-to-video sequels, it's nice to see that they put so much time and attention into crafting a really smart sequel that has a lot to say about internet culture as well as friendship in general and what it means to have a friendship that you want to last forever, and what lasting forever means and how you go about making that friendship last. And I just think it's a stunning film because of that.
Listen, I came to your neck of the face. I mean, there's a face in your neck. I mean, woods, neck of the woods.
At number 5, we have Big Hero 6. You know, originally I was like, wouldn't it be cool if Big Hero 6 was number 6, but the truth is, it's better than number 6. It's number 5. It's a really great film. This is actually Disney's first time using any Marvel characters in their films. Ralph Breaks the Internet has a few Marvel characters because of the Oh My Disney scene, but that came after this one. This was the first time they used Marvel characters in an animated medium for Disney. Obviously, we've seen animated Marvel characters in a lot of other places. We even see it in 2018 with Spider-Man and the Spider-Verse, but I think like Spider-Man and the Spider-Verse, the fact that this is animated makes it so much more fun than had it been live action. And I think there's a merit to live action, but having the animated medium, you can do so many things you can't do with live action. And that's why making a superhero film and making it animated is a genius choice. I wish Marvel did it more often, because here we see a Marvel story that is not just emotional. It doesn't just have the amazing Disney beats of the brotherly bond and, you know, losing a loved one and having to cope with that and grief and friendship and all that jazz, but you have great action sequences. You have amazing superhero moments as well, because you have the animation to do that, to go to new horizons. And I think that's what Big Hero 6 is so good at doing, is kind of expanding those horizons and showing what the animated medium can do for cinema, specifically superhero cinema, specifically genre cinema like this. I do think Hero is an endearing hero. He's a great protagonist, and I really do love the relationship between him and Tadashi and him and Baymax, and the fact that kind of Baymax is that tie to Tadashi. It's kind of like what we talked about Lilo and Stitch, where Lilo and Stitch is not the central relationship. It's really Lilo and Nani. Just like here, I don't think Baymax and Hero is the central relationship. I think it's really Hero and Tadashi, but Hero finds that closure of losing Tadashi through Baymax, and just the relationship they form too is so great. And this has a great comedic gag. It probably has the funniest moment of any Disney movie, where Baymax is losing battery. He's on low battery mode and he kind of gets deflated a bit and he's almost acting as if he's drunk. You know, there's this whole scene where he kind of comes home and stumbles up and Hero has to sneak him up into his room. I think that is the funniest scene I've ever seen in a Disney movie, and it just makes the experience that much more worthwhile. I think Baymax is an amazing character, probably my favorite character of all these films. I think he's just such a lovable, huggable, sweet, endearing hero. And it's just one of my favorite superhero movies that I go back to. Yes, not just animated superhero movies, but superhero movies in general, period. I love this movie. I think it's really underrated, and to be honest, I love How to Train Your Dragon. I love the sequel, but I think this was deserving of that Best Animated Feature Oscar.
You and Balloon Man.
At number 4, we have Zootopia. Zootopia is a very, very smart film. It delivers so many amazing messages about prejudice and bias, judging other people by the way they look and the cultures we come from, and how that plays into our interactions with other cultures when we go to different places and experience different walks of life. It's very profound. It's actually one of the most mature films thematically of any Disney film. I don't want to say they're adult themes, because I think these are themes that kids should be hearing and kids should be learning, especially at a young age, but they are definitely a lot more profound themes than we're used to seeing from Disney movies, and I think that's where Zootopia really excels. Using these animals to create this really rich world. I really love the world building here, just all the creative little ins and outs of each different location and what each animal represents in this grand scheme of things. I do think because it's trying to evoke such important themes, but try to cater them to a younger audience, I think sometimes the subject matter and the lessons and morals and themes are a little heavy-handed. It definitely doesn't seem as subtle as some of the other films that are preaching big important topics as well, but I think for a film like this, in trying to get that message across, you need to be a little heavy-handed, especially when you're trying to speak to kids. I think the more subtlety there is for a story like this, the more there is a capability of the lines to be blurred a little, because this is also unconventional in the fact that the predators in this sense are the ones who are being discriminated against, not the prey. And just the way we think of the food chain in general, you would think that the predators are the ones picking on the prey and the prey are the ones fearing the predators. So I think that's a little bit of a weird choice in the fact that the predators are the ones who are discriminated against and the prey are the ones who are, you know, making those biases against the predators. But I think just the overall idea of just biases and having preconceived notions of other species, I think that's the core of what Zootopia is getting at. Even though I do think, like I said, because of the nature of the food chain, it just gets a little complicated at times when you're trying to apply it realistically to actual animals and animal instincts and stuff like that, and the actual actual way animals behave. I think if you try to take it a little too realistically, sometimes that blurs with the social commentary, but I think on its own separately, I think it's really great. I think the social commentary really comes through. I think the animal stuff is fun, is engaging. I still think as important of a message as this is giving off, I think there are still some amazing comedic sequences, specifically the sloths in the DMV. I mean, that is the perfect encapsulation of what it's like to go to the DMV. For anyone who drives, you know, when you're at the DMV, it takes forever. And the use of a sloth to depict that is so genius. I mean, the way the creators and the animators and the writers just kind of brought to life this world is so impressive. It's so engaging, so consistently entertaining as well. I mean, this is a really great crime story.
What did we say? No, I sing anyone at my wedding.
I have to, baby. Daddy has to.
There's not a lot of music, and I know I docked Raya and the Last Dragon for that, but I think when a movie doesn't have any music, it needs to do even more in its theming, in its characters, in its interaction, in its comedy, and I think this film does that. It doesn't need the songs to be this amazing, memorable Disney film. It can just exist with its amazing messaging and its great characters, and I think it does a really successful job in doing that.
I am on
It?
break.
At number 3, I have the original Wreck-It Ralph. I know we talked about the sequel already, but it should be no surprise that I really like this movie because I do love those characters. As I said earlier, I'm really invested in the Ralph-Vanellope friendship, and I think this film does a great job in setting that up and showing that these lost souls who feel neglected in their communities, how they come together, and what it means to be a villain, or at least when society treats you like a villain, and what that does to someone, and how that can sometimes make someone more destructive and make someone more careless in the way they live their lives. But then it also gives that ambition to Ralph to want to be good and to want to make something of himself, but the way he goes about getting it, at first it is selfish. It's just there for the sake of having a medal, having a tangible thing to show people rather than actually learning something. But by the end he does learn something, and that's what's so amazing about this film. It does take some predictable routes. A film like this definitely does feel a little bit familiar, but I think the way they incorporate this world, like I said, the internet in the sequel, I think it's really well thought out, really well designed. I think the same is true here with Game Central Station, the idea that all these different train stations are basically plugs of outlets going into one another. I really love the world building here. It's a little smaller than the internet one, but I think because it's smaller, there's even more room for nuance, and I think the comedy here is really nuanced. It's got a great villain performance with Alan Tudyk.
Aha! You wouldn't hit a guy with glasses, would you? Aha! You hit a guy with glasses. That's well played.
I think the voice performances are amazing. Sarah Silverman, John C. Reilly, again, Jack McBrayer and Jane Lynch as the side characters. I think their side story is really charming and heartwarming too. It's very an unconventional romance, and I like how this doesn't really just try to force romance into the film for the sake of it, but giving these characters a justified place for their arcs to go, and the fact that they flesh out these backstories for these side characters and make them important parts of the plot.
Why do I fix everything I touch?
I really like this film. I do think it's colorful, it's vibrant, and again, like Zootopia, it doesn't have songs, but it doesn't need them because it has such great characters, such great humor, such great themes to it, and I think that's why Wreck-It Ralph is so successful and why it is already one of the instant classics, I would say, of films that are really going to stand the test of time, because unlike the internet one, the fact that he is coming from a game that is known to be around for a long time, I think that adds to it. The fact that it was already kind of dated, and that's the point. The fact that the aesthetic is a little bit retro, I kind of like that, and I think that's why it's going to have more of an enduring legacy than the sequel. But I do like both films, and I think this one is just stronger because it's kind of the origin of these characters, and it's really fleshing out these characters for the first time, and it really made us fall in love with these characters just instantly. So for that reason, it's here at number 3.
It's not that kind of duty.
I bet you really gotta watch where you step in a game called Hero's Duty.
At number 2, I don't know if this is recency bias, but I have Encanto. And I'll tell you right now, it's not recency bias, because when I first saw this film, I thought, it was okay. You know, it was kind of the standard Disney formula. The heroine who wants to find herself, and the idea that Disney's going away from no princes, and it's not about romance, it's more about finding your inner beauty and your inner self and your inner purpose and inner drive, and you have these colorful side characters. I kind of knocked it off for that, but the more I watch this film, the more I grow even deeper in love with it, because I think it's tackling some very important issues that go beyond just merely finding yourself. I think finding yourself is important, but this deals with finding yourself in the midst of adversity from the people that are closest to you. A lot of films deal with villains that are, you know, these big maniacal characters or these voodoo guys or evil video game characters. But in this sense, this villain, and it's not even a villain, it's an antagonist, it's Abuela, you know, the grandmother, and essentially by extension the whole family, in the fact that Mirabel just doesn't fit in because she doesn't have this gift, she doesn't have this superpower, or so she thinks. She doesn't have what the rest of the family has that makes them special. And I think that's even more profound than having any sort of maniacal villain, some mustache twirling villain, some secret villain who you didn't know was a villain like Hans or like Callahan in Big Hero 6 or like Bellwether in Zootopia. It's a common trope, the whole secret villain thing, and you know, that might be a fault with this era. But I think this is so strong because the villains or the antagonists in this sense are the most loved ones in Mirabel's life, and I think that makes for an even deeper and more complicated dynamic. I think the fact that she loves her family so much, but the family is the thing that doesn't make her feel welcome or accepted. I think Disney still has a long ways to go in getting more queer LGBT representation in their films, but I think this is the closest we've gotten. And the fact that this could mirror a coming out story, the idea of someone having this side to them that is not necessarily different, and we learned that in this film, that she's not different, she's just unique in her own way. Her superpower is that she is who she is, and she's an amazing person, and I think that's what's beautiful, and that's kind of why I think this is more of a coming out story, in the fact that her abuela doesn't accept her at first. She kind of neglects her, she kind of thinks of her as lesser, she blames a lot on her. You know, she isn't warm and embracing of Mirabel because Mirabel doesn't have what the rest of the family has. Just like in a normal coming out story, which I shouldn't say normal because there aren't enough of them, but in a coming out story, in something like even Glee, the idea that, you know, immediately the family is a little closed off, a little more reserved. I think of Santana Lopez on Glee and her grandmother in this story. The idea that it's also coming from this Latina background where it's a little bit more conservative, a little bit more strict, and the idea of this character not feeling accepted and welcomed by her family, and then learning to find that connection with her loved ones. And I think that's what makes Encanto so special. Yes, the colors are amazing. I mean, I love the infusion of Colombian culture.
The rats told me everything. Don't eat those.
I absolutely love the music in this thing. Lin-Manuel Miranda is terrific. We don't talk about Bruno. There's a reason that's a big hit, and I don't think it's for the same reason Let It Go is. Let It Go is like this big anthem. We don't talk about Bruno as like this really interesting end of Act 1, kind of tying together all these different musical motifs into one grand epic number where all the characters are singing their own little motif and all the characters have their own point of view on this Bruno character. There's a sense of intrigue, sense of mystery. I really love that song, and I love all the songs in this, Surface Pressure being another one. And even her character, the idea that she has all this pent up pressure for what her family wants her to be and what she wants to be. You could even look at her story as almost like a coming out story. You could even look at the other sister as a coming out story, and the fact that she doesn't want all these pretty flowers. She wants to make this odd looking cactus once in a while because that's who she is. She isn't always the glamour and the beauty that her family wants her to put on. And I think that's what's so special about this film, is it's not just Mirabel coming into her own and showing her family that being different is okay. It's the other sisters as well coming to terms with that and addressing that. And you can look at it as a parallel for coming out in that way, and not just coming out with sexuality, but just in terms of having a difference or having a unique talent, or in my case, you know, being an artist in a world where a lot of your family played sports, and having to kind of come forward with that information and be like, yo, I want to do this artistic route the rest of my life. I don't want to play sports, and that's okay. And I'm very fortunate that my family embraced it at a very young age and said, yeah, no, kid, you belong on stage. You do not belong behind a pitcher's mound. But I really do think that's what's so special about this film, is that it doesn't just preach this idea of finding oneself like something like Moana does, or something like even Raya and the Last Dragon, or even Frozen, but this is a real human thing that people experience, the idea of being neglected and feeling left out of the family, and finding a way to connect to the family, or in some cases tragically not. And I think a lot of people are going to find themselves seen in this film, not just Colombian people, not just people who can relate to the very specifics of the culture, but just the generalization of this family dynamic. I think it's so profound, and I think it's so stunning to see a film like this tackle those themes. Yes, I would have liked them to be a little bit more overt with it, but I don't think Disney's at a place yet to do that, and it's unfortunate, but I do like that they can still tell a story like this. And I think that's why Encanto has gotten better with me with each rewatch, is because I'm able to find those nuances even more so. I just love this film, and I think in even more time, this could end up being like one of my top 10 Disney films of all time. It's already getting close to it. I'm very excited to see if Disney continues going down this route. I think there are exciting things ahead for Disney.
A lot of stairs. But at least I'll have a friend. Nope, you flew away immediately.
But number one, it's Tangled. It's one of the films I've had the most time to actually like sit with and enjoy. I do like that at first it seems a little bit more of your conventional princess story. You know, we're talking about a girl who's locked away in a tower. She has this evil stepmother, or not stepmother, but you know what I mean, like this evil mother figure, and then there's this guy and they fall in love. But there's so much more to it, and I think it's the fact that Prince Flynn Rider is not really Prince Flynn Rider. He's just this guy named Eugene who's scrappy and who puts on this facade.
I could get used to a view like this. Yep, I'm used to it. Guys, I want a castle.
And I like how Rapunzel herself isn't the conventional princess either. She, you know, has this edge to her. She has this frying pan that she slaps him in the face with. I think right from that very early moment when she slaps him in the face with a frying pan, we know right off the bat that this is not a conventional Disney princess story. And that's why I like this film, is it's not conventional. It's got a princess and a love interest, yeah, and it's got that villain, like I said. It's got the fun animal sidekicks, but it's so much more. It is kind of about finding yourself, but also breaking down the boundaries of yourself and what you are told you're confined to. In this case, she's confined to her small tower, and Flynn Rider's case, he thinks he just has to be this bad boy criminal, but they both find through each other that they can be so much more than that. And I think it's also a great metaphor for Disney as a brand, that they can be so much more than just the traditional fairy tale. They could put a spin on it. I love what Tangled has to say about the Disney formula, in the fact that it does play into the strengths of the Disney formula. It doesn't lose the great things about the Disney formula, but it takes the things that are a little tired and just revamps them, turns them on its head, and makes for just such a fun, enjoyable ride. But those sweet, sentimental moments are just as great. The scene with them on the lake with all the colors, all the lanterns, it takes my breath away every time I watch it. It is a beautiful sequence, in an amazing, beautiful movie. I love this movie so much. I love the characters. I think Maximus is hilarious. I really don't have anything negative to say about it, aside from the fact that, yeah, it plays into the formula at times. But again, like I said, it takes the stuff that's tired from the formula and just totally revamps it, totally makes it new, and that's what makes it special, and that's ultimately why it is my favorite, because it's the one I've gone back to the most. It uses the musical numbers effectively and places them throughout in a very effective manner. I love the characters. Mandy Moore and Zach Levi are amazing in their voice roles. I really don't have anything negative to say. Tangled is amazing, and I know the debate always comes up, Tangled, Frozen, Tangled, Frozen. It's Tangled. Tangled wins 10 times out of 10. Tangled wins. Tangled is my favorite of this era.
Didn't want to have to do this, but you leave me no choice. Here comes the smolder.
But there are so many amazing movies of this era, and that's why this was such a hard list to construct. I think almost all these movies are movies I would go back and rewatch again, because I think they all have their own merits, especially with the animation. The animation here for all these films is so stunning. So if you haven't seen any of them, go check them out. I think some are stronger than others, but all in all, this is a great era, and this is a great series that I've had the privilege and honor of doing, getting to watch all these films through, ranking them, analyzing them, looking at the change and the whole transformation of all the animation, just how Disney has evolved. Yes, I wish it would go back to make some of those 2D animated films once again, because I think those are so special in their own right, and we see so much CG animation from other studios now that I wish they went back to 2D every once in a while. But I think Disney, you know, there's a reason they call it magic, Disney magic, and I think these films are very special, and I had a really fun time ranking them. So let me know in the comments down below what your rankings are for the Disney revival, and then if you want to be bold, if you want to be ambitious, give me your ranking for all 60. Let me know in the comments below how you would rank all 60 of these Disney films, and if you want to go back to check out those other videos, like I said, there is a playlist. As I said, next week I'll be doing a tier list, a semi-ranking kind of tier list video for the Disney live-action remakes. Next week I'll also be bringing you a review of Strange World, the newest Disney animated film. Where would I place it amongst these films in the revival era? Where will I place it in my overall ranking? Only time will tell, and maybe I'll tell you at the end of that video. But until then, this was a lot of fun, and remember, we don't talk about Bruno.